All right, everybody. Hi there. My name is Yvette LaFleur, and it is good to be back after being away for a couple of weeks. And I am here with Amy Linder Lesser, and she is an advanced grief recovery method specialist and a certified life transitions coach. And she is an MSW. And her focus is compassionately supporting women through the emotions and feelings of loss and grief that arise from major life transitions. And I can tell you right now, if you are listening to this, you probably have had many major life transitions of all different types, and we're going to talk about that today. Amy has navigated more than 30 deaths of family and friends within a 60-year period, which is way more than the average 1 in 7 years. I didn't know that until I was talking with Amy, that the average is 1 in 7 years. This led her to examine how she could help others. Specifically, the losses of her husband and her BFF led her to the work she is passionate about today. And I can tell you she's passionate about it because she and I have spoken several times about the work that she does. Today, we'll talk about life quakes. And if you've never heard that word, it's going to stay with you and make an impression. How grief and loss have no set healing timetable or pace, yet with a growth mindset can be seen as a gift and with silver linings and lessons. And Amy and I met because we have both written a chapter in a book coming out November 1st called Life Shifts. And ironically, if you will, our chapters have to do with life quakes that have happened and the aftershocks, if you will. So, Amy, thank you so much for joining us today and being willing to talk about a topic that grief is one of these topics that so many people want to just push under the rug. They don't want to come face to face with it. And the reality is, the more we shine a light on it, the easier it is for those who are walking the walk through grief.
Definitely. Thank you so much for having me on today, Yvette. I've been looking forward to this for a little while now.
Yeah.
And you're right. Grief and anger and depression are all what are called dark emotions, the shadow side of life. And especially as Americans, and I think other societies also, we are taught to hide our feelings, the negative ones. Everybody wants to see us smiling and isn't life wonderful? It is most of the time. And there are times that it isn't. And part of I think my purpose in life is to help normalize grief and to allow people to go through it. What I've learned is that when we don't express our grief, our sorrow, our anger, our depression, it's going to pop up again, and it's going to pop up someplace else, and sometimes in a not so nice way. It could be with anger, hostility, violence, addictions. I'd much rather cry for a while than have any of those other emotions.
Yeah, and it creates, it can create disease in the body, because the body, you're trapping all of that in your body, and your body will tell you, if those emotions are trapped. And like you, I too, part of my journey, part of the reason I'm here is to actually heal the grief in my lineage. So it's like I've got this sack of opportunity, if you will, to in the work that I do personally, to heal that grief. So yeah, we get those messages at a really young age. I mean, I will share with you and then hand it back. When my father died, I was just shy of 14 years old. And I remember being told, don't cry, your father wouldn't want you to cry. Now, I know that was the adults' way. They felt that they were taking care of me. And, that was how they dealt with the grief and how to take care of a teenager whose father just died. And yet that message, it just pushed that down. and and to this day, I'm still working on uncovering all of that, which had been buried.
Right. I mean, it's been said that grief is the penalty we pay for love, that the stronger the love is, the harder the grief is. And there's no way to decide who or what has the highest amount of love, therefore the most grief when that person or thing no longer is. I don't like to use the word loss because it implies that it can be found. And with death, I personally believe a spirit always exists.
Yes.
But the body is not around anymore. And, we can't find that person or that animal again in our current lifetime. So either passes on or dies. It's such a hard thing. And even the word loss, people, it's a euphemism. We're not saying what really happened. Yeah. Just like expired. The first time I ever heard that word, I kept thinking to myself, then why didn't they just renew their whatever, like a library book, or your credit card expired. Okay, get a new one. It should be so easy. But
it should be.
We have a hard time saying somebody died.
Right. We do. We do have all kinds of language we use to soften the reality of their physical body is no longer on this earthly plane. Yeah.
And it does help to believe that their spirit stays with us forever. Certainly as long as we live, we have a memory of them. Therefore, they are still here.
Well, I know in the work I do with the energy healing I do, I have people come through for my clients, right? So I know, and I get images and stuff that there's no way for me to know about. And when I mention them, they're like, oh, that's my mother, that's my grandmother, that's my grandfather, whatever. So yeah, they're here in a different energetic form.
Definitely. I know there are times where I might be doubtful about something or need some support, and I can sort of feel my husband's hands on my shoulders, or like as we're talking now, I feel his hands on my upper arms. I'm not sure if he's hugging or he's pushing, whatever he's doing. I just know that his presence is here. And I also know that the first time I saw someone after they had died was my father. And I remember walking into the hospital room, and he had passed away maybe a half hour before I got back to the hospital. And I walked in and I saw his body sitting there or laying there. And I was like, that's not my father. I knew that there was something missing. His anima, his spirit was not there, that it left his body, and that was okay. I looked and I went, well, the body served him. It was his vessel here, and I'm glad he's in a better place.
Yeah. So there's so many different questions I have for you, and I want to start with a lot of us have conversations around death, and we've heard about the stages of death with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I think that there was some service offered to us because it was introduced to create the conversation, which had been a conversation that was not public, if you will. And yet I think there's a disservice because our logical brain wants things to go A, B, C, D. And that is not how grief happens. So let's talk a little bit about that. I open the floor to you to talk a little bit about.
Okay. So I did write something. I haven't put it out there yet, but it's why the 5 stages of grief are bull, whatever you want to use. And the first thing to know is that when Elizabeth Kubler-Ross came up with that, it was not meant to address the bereaved. It was meant to address the stages that a dying person goes through.
Oh.
Not the survivor, not the loved one who's here on earth after the other person dies. It was, how somebody who's been told that they're dying and it's imminent, how they deal with that. So that's the first thing. It's not meant for you or for me or any of us who are here. The other thing is that I think what it does is it makes people believe that things are going to happen in a very neat and orderly way. I'm going to go to stage 1, then I step up, but I go to stage 2, then I go to 3. Life is not that easy. It's more of a spiral, and the spiral, sometimes you're going up it, sometimes you're going down it. And you could go from stage 1 to stage 3 to stage 2 to stage 1 to stage 5 and keep doing it. There's also, in most current theory, there's no end. And I know that sounds really awful, but when you grieve, the love and the grief doesn't completely go away. There are things that happen in your life further along the road that may bring something back up, and you go right back into having a day or more of crying and being depressed and sad and missing the person and being lonely and being angry, sometimes at the person who passed away, sometimes at God, sometimes at the circumstances or whatever it is. The other thing that I think it does is it encourages people to compare. And the one thing that I know for sure is that every single grief experience is different. So I've had 30 experiences, and unfortunately, I had 2 last week. They just keep going. And I know that for each one, my reaction, my emotions, my response is completely different. I also know that for, like, let's say a wife and a child, they're grieving the same person. If it's the husband, father who passed, their relationships were different. If there are more than one sibling, they're going to grieve differently because they had different relationships with their father. And how I grieved for my husband is different from how another wife or husband will grieve for their husband. We're all different. And, just because something was easy or hard doesn't mean the next time it's going to be the same. Mm-hmm. In my most recent chapter in another book, which is on the grief experience, I talk about how even though I've had all of these losses in my life, the hardest grief has been in losing my best friend. She passed away a little over a year ago. And while I grieved and still think of my husband, it was the loss of my best friend because we talked to each other every single day for 44 years. I knew her before I knew my husband, and I knew her after my husband died. And it was a very different relationship. There are things you tell your closest girlfriends that you never tell your spouse.
Right.
Or your children, or your parents. So it doesn't matter what the relationship is, there's grief. And you and I had talked briefly off camera about things that cause grief that aren't necessarily sad things or losses. That, for a kid going off to college, going away from home the first time, there are a whole bunch of mixed emotions. Mm-hmm. It's a change. And every change causes grief, and every grief causes change. Mm-hmm. We can grieve over happy things because there have been changes. We're excited because we're getting to live away from our parents. We get to party with people. we get a whole new experience. And yet we're grieving the loss of our home friends, of the security and the comfort of our home and our family. There are things to grieve. We could grieve, for example, somebody who is an alcoholic who has been clean and sober for years has a relapse. And it may have been just a one-time drink. That person is going to grieve the loss of their sobriety for that amount of time.
Right, right.
Last year, I released 60 pounds. Unfortunately, they found me again. But, but I found that I was grieving the person that I saw before the weight loss. I didn't see that person anymore. And I was grieving who I was. All kinds of things can cause grief. Moving, moving from one house to another, to another. A friendship that ends, even if it's your choice.
Yep.
I had a very close friend for 26 years, and I made the decision to end the friendship because it became toxic. And it doesn't mean that I don't miss him. I don't miss his humor, his fun, the things we used to do together. Yet for my own health, I needed to set that strong boundary and say, it's over.
And I think it's important for us to honor the grieving process of others without that comparison you were talking about a little bit earlier, because everybody's journey is so different. And, we may say, oh, I wish I had that problem, right? And it does no service to anybody. When there's the good thing that happens, if you will, and people are grieving. We'll talk about the 60 pounds, releasing the 60 pounds, right? People can say, oh, I wish I did, and they don't get that your experience is your experience, your grief is your grief, your process is your process. And it's important to allow, I think one of the biggest gifts we can give people is to allow them the space to feel what they're feeling, rather than thinking that it should be a different way. Your life is different than theirs. Your grief is different than theirs. Allow people to have their journey.
And one of the things that you said that I think is so important is that we need to allow ourselves and everyone else to feel our feelings, whatever they are, fully. To not say, I just have to put one foot in front of the other. Well, we may have to do that for short periods of time. If we have something that we have to do, like we may have to go back to work after a death. Mm-hmm. And obviously, you're not going to function at 100% of your capacity. However, you have to function at a decent amount, otherwise you're going to lose your job. Right. And so just, know that you're going to do that. You're going to pull yourself together, take all of your energy to do that. And then when it's safe, when you're back home, when you can break down and feel the sadness, allow yourself to do it to the full extent. If it means saying no to going out with friends because you'd rather be alone, that it's too hard to put on that happy face and to smile, then allow yourself to do that. Allow yourself to come up with new traditions. For the holidays, we're coming up soon to Thanksgiving. And, for many of us, that's a family time. And we may want to find a new tradition. Maybe you don't host Thanksgiving at your house right after a loss. Maybe you go to somebody else's house, or you go out to a restaurant, or you don't cook and you have a potluck and ask everybody to bring their favorite dish. Whatever it is, figure out what you need to do to allow yourself to be as comfortable as you can possibly be.
And I really like what you're saying, because what that does is it honors you, like it honors the me in the journey. And so taking time to be silent, to go within, to whether you do it through journaling or meditation, or you take a walk or you take a bath or whatever it is, and ask yourself, like, what is it that I need for this time? What is it that I need during this holiday, this season, this first, because they often talk about the firsts. What is it that would serve me best? And then do that thing. Because that honoring of yourself helps with your journey of grief. Because when you don't, what you do is you pile on something on top of it and it just covers it up, and it's there. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater, right? It's there and you get it pressure and it pops up elsewhere. Yeah.
Definitely. And for many women, I think we've been sort of taught that self-care is selfish. It's not. It goes back to the same thing as they say on the airplanes. Put your oxygen mask on first and then help the next person. You can't pour from an empty cup. And we too often are taking care of everybody else. As women, most of us are people pleasers, and we're the last one on that list.
I just flew quite a bit in the last week because I was on vacation, and they do the oxygen mask thing. But what I hadn't thought about was one of the things they say now is if you're wearing a face covering, a mask, you take that off and then you put on your oxygen. And it just, what I was struck by was that mask that you put on is what you've covered up, right? To not allow yourself to do that self-care. So you got to take that away to allow that self-care in.
I love that.
I hadn't thought about that until you mentioned it.
That's so true. And I haven't heard that yet. I guess I haven't. Well, I have flown since COVID. Interesting. They haven't said it, but I love that.
Yeah.
And it's very true. We're all wearing masks.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when we're grieving and we're trying to live up to society's expectations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are the shoulds.
And I used to have a
expression, don't should on yourself.
I was just going to say that when I taught, I used to have a poster on my wall that said, don't should on yourself.
Yep. Which is so true.
Yes. Let's talk about a word that you introduced me to that I have been using since, life quakes. So share a little bit about what life quakes are and how they fit into this conversation around grief.
Life quakes to me are the normal life transitions we go through. So becoming a double digit, becoming a teenager, graduating from high school, going to college or not going to college, getting married, getting divorced, becoming a parent, all of those normal transitions, when you put them on steroids, so either they're coming fast and furious, or they're just like, oh my God, something just hit me over the head with it. Those are, to me, life quakes. Mm-hmm. And life quakes are sort of like earthquakes. They have tremors. Sometimes they start with a tremor and then they grow, and then there are tremors after. And especially when you're talking about death, you have maybe an illness. So sometimes we start with anticipatory grief. We start to say our goodbyes before the person has died. And then we go on and we get through the grief. And then on the other side, maybe 5 years later, you're at a funeral for somebody else, and all of a sudden it hits you. It's like somebody taking a pan and hitting you over the head, and you're like, ugh. Or I know for me, it's often anniversary responses. So like, I didn't even realize it. I'm doing another course right now. And the first day of this grief coaching course happened to be on September 20th. didn't even think about it until we started to talk about grief. And all of a sudden, it was like, oh my God, this is my father's death anniversary. He
Mhm.
died in 1981 on September 20th. I mean, that's 40 something years ago, 42 years ago. I hadn't been thinking about it. And then as soon as we said the date, I was like, bang, okay. And it all came back, how much I missed him and how much I wish he had been around to meet his granddaughters or his great grandchildren. To walk, well, he sort of walked me down the aisle, but to be there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And those happen. But life quakes also can be the happy things. They can be the things that we don't necessarily associate with grief. Most of the time, I think people think of grief with death only.
Right.
And grief comes from any kind of change, that whether it's a happy change, whether it's a sad change, becoming a parent for the first time. It might be the first time you realize that you're never going to go to the bathroom alone again. You're losing freedom.
Right.
Same thing with marriage. Even if you're excited about getting married, and hopefully you don't get married unless you were happy about it. However, some people aren't, that it's still a change. It's still the end of your independence. And those cause grief. You're losing a status or a role that you played. It could be a change in your job situation. You may have been thinking that you're the person who's going to get that next raise or the next higher promotion, and it goes to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
There's the loss of your dream. There's the loss of the income, loss of expectations.
Cool.
It's not necessarily a horrible thing. It's something that you probably will get over easier than another type of loss. However, it's a loss and there is grief. Or for the person who's been in the same career for 20, 30 years and gets downsized. And all of a sudden, their entire life, they've been thinking and defining themselves in that role, that their social life is connected to work, their hobbies, their 24/7 almost is that job. And now it's like, oh my God, who am I?
I faced that last year when I retired from a leadership role that I'd had for 27 years. It was the best choice. And yet there was so much grief tied into it, because it was, a lot of it was identity.
Yep.
And it took time afterwards, like, who am I if I'm not in this role? Like, how do I define myself? And so it is a process for sure.
That to me is one of the best things about a life quake, is it presents an opportunity for us to redefine ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Most of our lives, other people have defined us, other people's expectations. So even if somebody didn't say to you, you're going to be this, they expected you to, and so you didn't even think twice about it. It just became your idea. When a life quake hits, it gives you the chance to say, whoa, wait a minute, stop the world. Who am I? What is it now that I can define what I really love? What is it? Who is it that I want to be? And I think it's very freeing in many ways.
Absolutely.
Life will never be the same. And that happens to all of us regardless of what the life quake is. It will never be the same as before. But different isn't necessarily bad. It's just different. There's no value judgment there. So when you get a chance to define what the different will be, there's your opportunity. There's your silver lining.
And that's a perfect segue, because I wanted to end our discussion about, one of the pieces to the work that you do is help people define the silver linings. So can you say a little bit more about that?
I think the first thing is to get yourself to a point where your mindset is a growth mindset rather than a limiting mindset. So it means thinking that things are always working out for me. Things are happening for me, not things are happening to me. So no longer being the victim, instead being the controlling, the one in charge. I'm trying, I think it was a John Lennon, and I'm gonna misstate the quote, but his quote was something like, things are always working out, and if they haven't worked out, it's not the end. And I know I've really mutilated the quotation, but so if things have not worked out the way you wanted it to, it's not the end of the experience. Other than resurrecting someone or something, we can change what we do. I talked about this on my last podcast. I had been thinking for a long time that I wanted teal colored highlights in my hair.
Yes.
So I did. I had the hairdresser do it. And unfortunately, my hair came out Kelly green. And
it wasn't St. Patrick's Day, right?
There's still a little bit in here. I was like, no, bad idea. Let's change it. So I went back the next day and she fixed it. Things like that. You know what? I took a chance. I took the risk. I tried it. I hated it. I undid it. Mm-hmm. We could do that with most things. Most things are not permanent. Mm-hmm. And that's something to remember. You try something. If it works and you like it, great. If it doesn't, you try again. Find something else. I think we're blessed with the ability to take multiple roads to get to the same place. Whatever our final destination is, it's almost like a GPS where you can pick which route you want based on what experiences you want. I want tolls, I don't want tolls. I want highways, I don't want highways. We have the same thing. They all will eventually lead to where we're going. And we may not even know it. Some may be faster routes, some may be slower routes, some are more windy, country roads, and others are highways. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't necessarily matter. If we can believe that things are happening for me. So even if it's not something I wanted to happen, okay, what was I meant to learn from this? Even with failure, if I can learn from my failure, which means don't do your hair teal blue, then I'm okay. I said to the hairdresser afterwards, the next time I tell you I want a color, you just say to me, you really didn't like it the last time, remember that. Okay. And I'm laughing, and it's a trite example, yet it is true. We can change our directions, and we can look for the things. It's not easy to see a silver lining when we're right in the middle of something. And I understand that. And I'm not suggesting that right when you're going through one of the most difficult life quakes around, a loved one's death, don't try at that point. Just wait. Allow yourself to experience the emotions, and they will change. They'll go up, they'll go down. They'll be, in the gutter, and then they'll be up in the sky. Allow that to happen. Do the work that needs to be done, as far as if it's a death and you're very closely associated, if there are legal things that you have to take care of, if there are financial things that you have to take care of, at least start with them. before you can start thinking about who do I want to be afterwards, or what was the lesson that I learned. I sold the inn that I owned and ran for 25 years, sort of on a whim. Somebody rang my doorbell and I said, well, I'm not looking to sell, but every business is for sale if the price is right. I ended up selling. And then I found myself at almost 65 going, now what do I do? I'm too young to not work,
Right.
and didn't know what. So I decided I would do coaching. I had already been certified as a coach. I was a social worker. And I thought, well, I've been doing innkeeping for 25 years. Let me coach innkeepers. And I tried, and it just didn't work. Innkeepers didn't think that they needed to pay for coaching, and that was okay. And then my friend Liz passed away. And what came out of that to me was the lesson that I could help other people deal with their grief in a healthier, more productive way and find their silver linings. So it again was a silver lining that came out of deep grief.
Yep. And I love that things are happening for me rather than to me. You didn't say the rather, that's how I wrote it down. Because I think that there's that opportunity to put yourself in that space, opens you up for what's there. It also opens you up for there's a way in which when we talk about things happening to me, it closes us down to and doesn't allow for the grief or the emotions to be expressed. And things are happening for me, even though that sounds positive, it still is an open statement that allows you to emote whatever there is so that you can release, because the more you release the emotion, the more healing happens, which is important no matter what the life quake is.
It's also a distinction between being a victim,
yes,
and being somebody who takes responsibility for themselves and their actions in their lives. It's the difference between a survivor and a thriver.
mm-hmm.
And for me, there was no question. Being a survivor to me was almost like sleepwalking. It
Mm-hmm.
was just going through the motions and not caring. And I knew that it was important for me, and I hope for most other people, if not everyone, to find joy in their lives and to thrive. Life, we're alive. Let's live, and let's find ways to do it.
Well, Amy, we could talk for days about grief and processing grief and how to and all of that, but we don't have the time for that.
We will have to continue this, and we'll continue it on my podcast.
Oh, perfect. So before we go, let's just say in this video, how people can find you and how they can find me. So I'll let you share a couple of places, and know that wherever you find this video, there will be links to find both of us. But where can people find you, Amy?
Okay, if you can see on the screen the correct spelling of my name, there's an N on either side of the D for Lindner. So I'm on Facebook under Amy Lindner Lesser. And then I also have 2 Facebook business pages. One is Introspection Grief to Growth, and the other is Amy Lindner Lesser Grief to Growth Life Coach. The website is Introspection, and yes, there's an extra N at the beginning, and that's because of my past life as an innkeeper and my love of inns and the innkeeping industry. And if you go to my Facebook page, on the banner, there's a way to, if you click on the picture in the banner, it will take you to a link to get my free guide on navigating the 7 phases of life transitions.
Hmm. Excellent, excellent. And you can find me, Healing with Yvette, on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. Same name, same website, Healing with Yvette. Same all over the place. So again, Amy, thank you so much for spending time talking with me about a topic that so many want to sweep under the rug, and both of us are like, let's shine a light on it and help people out and through this. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for allowing me to come on and to share with you. It's been great.